Seriously? Assalamu alaikum, ya ahlul internet. So, seriously, Pharaoh was a complete jerk. I mean, he was beyond a jerk. He was kind of like a god among jerks. In fact, he literally considered himself to be a god. Allah quotes him in the Quran when he says, Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I am God Most High. Like, really? I mean, this guy eats and farts and gets the sniffles like everyone else, and he thinks that he makes the sun rise and he makes the world turn, assuming that he knows that the world turns. I mean, he's referred to in the Quran as the Lord of Steaks, but not because he grilled a really mean ribeye, but because he really enjoyed torturing people. Like, he would crucify them, you know, he fed babies to alligators, he had some really weird hobbies. He kept the children of Israel, and they were the believing descendants of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. You could call them Jewish, you could call them believers. They believed in Allah, and they followed the legacy of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. He kept them in appalling slavery, and he had this idea or this dream, or just this idea that somewhere along the line, a little boy from the children of Israel would rise up and overthrow him. So the logical conclusion that he drew from that was that he needed to start killing babies, because he was just that kind of guy. Now, there's a problem with killing babies. I mean, apart from the obvious moral and ethical ramifications, it's that when your entire civilization and economy and lifestyle is based on slave labor, you kind of need slaves. And so some of those babies need to survive so that they can grow up and die building your pyramids. That's why Pharaoh's advisors told him that, look, dude, go easy on killing the babies. Don't kill babies all the time. Just kill babies every other year, and only the boy babies, okay? Okay. That's how Musa alayhi salam had a brother. Did you ever wonder about that? Did you ever wonder how Musa alayhi salam had a brother when he wasn't supposed to even be alive and the baby boys were like illegal? Harun alayhi salam was born in a safe year, and that's how he survived. Musa alayhi salam survived through direct divine intervention, obviously. And it's not that Allah shone a golden light from the sky and commanded his mother to put him in a basket and float him down the Nile River. What actually happened was that Allah inspired Musa alayhi salam's mother with this idea that if she heard the soldiers coming, she would put baby Musa in a basket, and then she kept the basket tethered on a rope. And she tied it to the riverbank, and she could let it float out a bit so that if he cried, no one could really hear him. And then when the soldiers came back, she could pull the rope back in and take him out of the basket, and he'd be safe. Now, the day that she finally heard the soldiers coming, she had the plan in her mind, but obviously she was in a bit of a panic. She ran to the riverbank, she put Musa alayhi salam in the basket, and then she ran back home, and alhamdulillah, she passed the baby-free death squad inspection. Have you ever left your baby alone with anyone else? I mean, have you ever left them with like your husband or well-intentioned grandparents or even their loving auntie, and went out for coffee and still spent the entire time wondering if the baby is okay, or whether they're cold, or whether they're hungry, or whether they're pooped, or anyone's forgotten to pick them up? Have you ever left your baby unattended? In a river? In a drowning hazard? Surrounded by the forces of the baby-hating Pharaoh? Imagine the complete distress, the complete anguish, and the panic, and just the heart-destroying pain until she could get back to him and get back to the basket and run in there and realize that, oh my God, she forgot to tie the rope. I would have died. Alhamdulillah, she survived. And she sent Musa alayhi salam's elder sister to run along the riverbank and see if she could find a basket, because obviously she couldn't call for help. If she called for help and said, help, my baby, they'd be like, oh, you have a baby? So she couldn't do that. So his sister ran off, and she saw the basket kind of bobbing along the water, and she followed it until it started floating to kind of a more VIP section of the riverbank. And his sister hid, and she watched as some VIP there has their handmaidens there, and the handmaidens are like, oh, a basket. So they swim out to go and get it, and they bring it back to their mistress. And it turns out that their mistress is not just any VIP, it happens to be a VVVIP. Asiya, one of the wives of the Pharaoh, aka King of Jerks. So Asiya opened the basket, and she found inside of this little beautiful baby who happened to be Musa alayhi salam. And she utterly fell in love with him, maybe because she was a kind and generous and very loving woman, maybe because she wasn't able to have children of her own, which alhamdulillah was a good thing, because can you imagine a wonderful woman like Asiya being the mother of little mini pharaohs? Ugh, awful. So the sister, realizing, hey, this might not be so bad, she goes up to the women and says, hey, you've got a baby. I know a nursemaid, and, I could hook you up. And remember, they didn't make formula back then. So when a baby needed food, it needed to be nursed. You had to get a nursemaid. And that's how, by the grace of Allah, Musa alayhi salam was not only raised as a prince in the Pharaoh's court, he was also cared for by his own mother. And then she was able to stop dying of maternal guilt a little bit. Now, Pharaoh wasn't happy about having this random baby boy wash up on the shores of his wife's heart, especially since he had spent all year long killing babies, and now it meant that he had missed one. But Asiya didn't have any kids, and she pleaded with him, and she's like, come on, please, let me keep him. I'll feed him, I'll walk him, I'll love him, I'll play with him. And Pharaoh's like, okay, fine, but first, let me see if he's going to overthrow me. So Pharaoh comes up with these tests to see if baby Musa has the skills to overthrow his kingdom before he's even capable of walking. Musa passed them, making him the ultimate baby counter prankster. And it also left him with a burned hand. But that's another story. Now, we're going to fast forward a bit, and Musa alayhi salam is all grown up and turning into a fine young prophet of Allah. And seriously, when you live in the same house with someone, it probably takes like 5 minutes to realize that they're not a god. I mean, good luck with keeping up that act. Pharaoh was royally pissed. Get it? Royally? He was royally pissed. Because this little bit of river debris that washed up, he came and he raised it in his own house, and then he turns around and accuses him of being human? How rude. Where does he get off? Asiya, on the other hand, was like, yeah, I believe in the one true God that isn't my husband. And she sided with Musa, and she believed in Allah. I mean, but obviously she didn't do it openly. She didn't declare her faith because, I mean, if your husband kills babies, can you imagine what he does to adults? One day, Musa alayhi salam gets into a fight defending a man from the children of Israel and accidentally kills the guy who was fighting, the attacker. And then he has to flee the city, and then to make a long story short, he gets married, he gets revelation, and he's instructed by Allah to go back to Pharaoh and invite him back to the truth. Not fight with him, but to invite him, which is interesting because a lot of people get really angry in their dawah and they get really attacking on other people. And Allah commanded even Musa alayhi salam to speak kindly to the Pharaoh. That's a big deal. Musa alayhi salam is nervous and he asks Allah for backup. And so Allah appoints Harun alayhi salam, his brother, as co-prophet, and off they go to Egypt. On a side note, Musa alayhi salam actually had a speech impediment. He had a stammer. And that's why he makes dua for Allah to undo the knot in his tongue and help him to speak fluidly. Musa and Harun alayhi salam go to Pharaoh in the court. They're like, dude, you're not God. And also, God said to let the children of Israel go, okay? And Pharaoh's like, says you, of course I'm God. And so Musa alayhi salam shows him the miracles that Allah has given him. He throws his staff and it becomes like a real live snaky snake. And he opens his palm, which was the one that Pharaoh caused to be burned, and it shines this really bright light. And then Pharaoh says, that's magic. My guys do magic too. I challenge you to a magic off. And Musa alayhi salam is like, no problem, man. High noon, public holiday, public arena, everybody be there, be square. So they set the date, and Pharaoh starts scouring the whole empire for the best magicians ever. He gets his A-listers together, and he tells them, listen, if you beat Musa in the magic off, then you'll all get cushy jobs in the palace. And they're all like, oh, yeah. So the day comes. It's noon, so everyone can see clearly, and there's no hanky-panky on the field. And Musa and Harun alayhi salam are on the field, and imagine this. A sea of top hats, an ocean of red satin scarves, waves upon waves of magically attired illusionists and impresarios from all over Egypt gathered together and marching. Because Pharaoh hadn't gathered a few magicians. He gathered a horde of them, and they marched out on the field together in a procession. How intimidating is that? And also, how self-conscious must he have been? Like, it's not going to be enough to get one magician. I need like all of them. So the procession comes to a halt, and Musa alayhi salam says to them, oh boy, you guys are here to trick God? How are you so sure that he won't destroy you for this? And the magicians are shocked, like, whoa, oh dear, he's got a point. I mean, they had been all like pomp and swagger and marching, and they're like, yeah, we can't lose. We're such good magicians. I mean, our expertise versus 2 men and 1 stick. But Musa alayhi salam hit the nail on the head. I mean, everybody knows that a person's not a god. You kind of know it. It doesn't take all that much. And when he asks, how do you know that Allah, the real God, won't destroy you for this? They're really shaken. And suddenly there's whispering in the sea of top hats. And some of the magicians say, guys, we can't do this. This is a bad idea. And the others are like, okay, if we back out of this, do you have any idea what Pharaoh's going to do to us? And Pharaoh's up there in the VIP section looking down, trying to see what's going on. Like, hello, why is this thing started yet? And the magicians start to panic. And then someone says, don't panic. And someone says, don't you tell me not to panic. And then someone else says, ah. Then they start pushing and shoving. And Pharaoh's like, oi, what's going on down there? So the magician's like, nothing. Everything is okay. And they're like, listen, it's okay. We got this. We just need to do what we practiced. And we'll be sitting pretty in the palace. Okay? Okay, we'll go home. So the magicians come back to Musa, a bit less confident. And they're like, so do you want to go first or should we? And Musa is like, yeah, it's okay, you go first. So they do. They bust out all their fancy rope tricks. They wiggle things from here and from there. And Allah says in the Quran that it was made to appear as though their ropes were moving. It was made to appear as though the ropes were moving. Not the ropes became snakes, but the ropes were made to appear as if they were moving. And they actually did a really good job. Like they did such a good job that even Musa seeing this felt a twinge of fear in the tiniest, deepest corner of his heart. A teeny tiny bit. Prophets are people too. Allah comforted him and Allah said to him, you know what? You got this. Don't worry. Just throw your staff. So Musa threw his staff. And not only did it become a snake, a real, live, writhing snake, it became a hungry snake. And it slithered out onto the playing field. And it devoured, literally, the magician's ropes. Like it ate them. It opened its jaws and it swallowed up yards and yards of lifeless rope, weaving between the magicians to reach every last one. And then it went back to Musa and turned back into a snake. There was no mic to drop, but there didn't need to be, because the magicians, every last one of them, threw themselves on their faces and said, we believe in the Lord of Musa and Harun. Pharaoh was furious. How dare you believe in him before I give you permission, he said. Really, he said that, like anyone needs his permission to believe anything. This is a conspiracy. He's the one who taught you magic. He's your master magician. Do you have any idea what I'm going to do to you? And the magicians who have seen magic and they've seen miracles, and they can tell that Pharaoh is neither magic nor miracle, have an amazing response. They tell Pharaoh to his face, in broad daylight, in a public arena, surrounded by royal guards, that Pharaoh can bring it. You do what you got to do. We've learned who our real Lord is, and hey, it's not you. Pharaoh follows through on his horrible threat, and the magicians have their arms and legs cut off on opposite sides, and they're crucified to the trunks of palm trees. And Allah have mercy on them, and may they be enjoying their time in Jannah. Ameen. Pharaoh huffs off in humiliation, and Musa and Harun leave with a very public victory for Aqidah. Yay! Back at home, one of Pharaoh's pretty little princesses is getting her hair done. And the hairdresser drops her comb. And the hairdresser, like a lot of moms that I know, says, oops, bismillah. And she picks up her comb. And the princess, who's not Asia's daughter, but from another one of the Pharaoh's wives, says, in the name of God, you mean my dad? And the hairdresser says, no, dear, the Lord of me and your dad and all of us, that God. And prissy Princess Pan says, oh, shall I tell Daddy about this? And the hairdresser says, no problem. So Prissy Princess runs off to Daddy Dearest and tells her what the hairdresser said about him not being God. Pharaoh tells his people to dig a big hole and fill it full of molten copper and heat it. And even before he's heard what the hairdresser has to say or whether she even said it, the hairdresser is summoned along with her children before the Pharaoh and his court and his big boiling cauldron. And he says to her, any requests? And see, he's not actually interested in justice or leadership or truth. He just wants to make an example out of her like he did the magicians. Instead of pleading or begging or trying to reason with him, Mama Bear hairdresser says, yeah, when you gather our bones, please bury them in one cloth, okay? And the Pharaoh says, you got it, babe. And then he has her eldest child thrown into the cauldron. Would your heart stop? Mine would. Hers didn't. She stayed strong. She didn't flinch. And then they threw in the second child. And she was still strong. And it was only when they told her to let go of the baby, who was so young, it was still feeding, that she felt a moment of hesitation. That's when Allah commanded another miracle, and her baby said, Mama, go for it. Pain in this life is so short compared to pain in the next. It's all good. We'll be fine. Just jump. So she did. And the story of the hairdresser's baby is one of 3 where babies have spoken from the cradle. I'll leave you to figure out what the other 2 are. After a long day of burning women and children to death in public, a Pharaoh really wants nothing more than to relax at home with his lovely wife. Imagine his surprise, though, when he comes home and his lovely wife, Asia, greets him with, I don't believe in you. You're not a god. You're not my God. My Lord is the Lord of Musa and the Lord of Harun. Pharaoh looks at her furiously and he says, "Do you have any idea what I'm going to do to you?" And she looks right back at him and says, "I know, but I don't care." See, she had just witnessed what the Pharaoh did to the hairdresser, a woman of less power, perhaps less religious certainty. And after all, how much more could a hairdresser know than a woman who raised the prophet of God? She had seen this woman's bravery, she had seen her death, and if the hairdresser could stand up to the Pharaoh, then so could she. Pharaoh grabbed his lovely queen, this soft, gentle woman who had been raised in privilege and never been harshly handled a day in her life, and dragged her out to the desert. And there he had her stripped naked and tied to the burning sand and deprived of food and water. Some stories say 3 days. She was tortured there while all the Pharaoh's pretty little princesses and his other wives and their rotten little kids looked on and laughed and jeered at her, while her handmaids probably felt awful but couldn't do a thing to save her and couldn't speak up, otherwise the same would happen to her. And she was hurt and humiliated and challenged to renounce her faith before she was killed. She refused. Eventually, Pharaoh got bored, and he decided that it was time to destroy Assia. Literally. He ordered his men to roll a huge boulder up to the top of a cliff where Assia was tied below, and to push it over the edge so that when it landed, her body would be obliterated. And Assia then made that famous dua, and she asked, "Oh Allah, please build for me, with you, a palace in Jannah," as compared to a palace with this jerk. She didn't ask for the palace first, she asked for Allah's company first. Allah took her life before the Pharaoh was able to. She died before the boulder fell on her. I don't know if Pharaoh knows that. And Pharaoh's story continues forward. But for now, I think this is a long enough video, and there's certainly enough interesting things that we didn't really know about, especially me. In making this video and learning more, I listened to Abdul Jangda's Tafseer of Surah Taha, which I highly recommend. So amazing to listen to. And also Omar Suleiman's Superstar series on Assia. May Allah be pleased with her. Part 2, the death of the Pharaoh, will be coming soon to internets near you. And in the meantime, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.